All right. So here we go. Wow. I'm not even actually there in person, and I'm just feeling the energy from LIB, wholeness and balance vibration to everyone. This is an amazing time just to be able to get here and to transmit in some way or another. I wanted to send a big shout out to Dream Rockwell, LIB, and the sound guys who have been doing an amazing job at making sure that this message is able to come to you and gets transmitted properly. So, wow, I have nothing but thanks for being here, and I'm going to do my best in this time that I'm going to be able to deliver, some concise but very powerful messages to allow that to transcend to the level in which not only the cosmos expects, but us in the audience also. So, first, I just wanted to say, for those who don't know me, I'm going to just go over a brief synopsis of what my life has been like and how I got to this point that I am now in order to be in front of you giving you this message today. And I would first say that, I'm just like you. Every one of us have such similarities, and then we're unique based on the decisions that we make. And that uniqueness is our power and is our greatness. So it's just an amazing time to be able to share the information about our uniqueness and to allow people to begin to discover themselves more and really connect. And so what happened to me was, since I was a little kid, I was pretty much raised. I ate, drank, slept.
Just in case you can hear me, Sevan, this is Greg. Just in case you can hear me, we're live. Go.
Okay, all right, so I'm getting a notification I'm live, so I'm already going live, so great. Basically, what I was saying is, and let me take this out my ear because I don't need it, is that I grew up in a scenario where we ate, drank, slept spirituality. And that was because my mother had already become very aware of what we know now about the system, the curriculum, the schools, all of that. And so I grew up in somewhat of a sheltered environment. And instead of TV, instead of comic books, instead of many things, I was given spiritual books to read. And that became my form of entertainment. So by the time I was about 10 or 12 years old, I had already read Pseudepigrapha, Apocrypha. I had already read so many books about spirituality that was beyond the scope of the standard religious systems. And also my mom was on her personal quest, so she didn't just stay in Christianity. She also went into Islam, and she went into different branches. And it was through those experiences of being there that I began to get really in touch with this whole spiritual field from the religious structure. However, as I did witness many people have a spiritual experience, I personally had not seen anything happen with them myself or felt anything happen with them myself. And at a certain point, I had what's called the slingshot effect. Because of being raised in this spiritual environment, I really wanted to just get out there, hang out with my friends and run the streets and do what I saw on TV. So around the time that I was around 13 or 14, I began to actually run away. And I began to really link up with friends, and we had like the downtown crew. And so I did that for a while, but the seeds of spirituality had already been planted. And as Dream mentioned, that I did run into some hardships. At some point, I hit a brick wall. And for that mistake that I made, I spent 1.5 years in the Queen's Dungeon, as we call it and know it now. And in that period, because I was so floored by the experience, because even though I had this way that I just wanted to be out, I was also very intelligent. I was one of the gifted and talented. I had actually graduated at age 15, and I didn't know that it was only my conduct, because they were marking me for conduct, my conduct that was actually holding me back from getting into these, gate schools. And they would always say, oh, you're on the waiting list, you're on the waiting list. So I'm glad that that waiting list existed now, because it didn't allow me to be compartmentalized by that system. But I was able to continuously use my intelligence to begin to, later on in life, actually, to discover the fabric of spirituality, to look deep into what exactly was going on in the world. And this is because of my experience. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about how this all came about and what we're doing right now to make sure that not only children, but also adults, because many of us adults are children, don't run into the circumstances that we often face in life, which is we don't have people that understand what we're going through. And so what happened to me is when I went away, I couldn't actually accept that I was going to be wasting my time in this prison rotting away. So what I began to do is I began to grab every single book and every single level of knowledge that was available to me. I had a couple friends that I was requesting spiritual books from because I started to relive that passion. And then I also started reading through the encyclopedia. So by the time I had got out after that year and a half, I acquired probably a Yale degree in the highest honors in spirituality, in regular life, and then even seeing beyond the veil and not being so naive about the environment and knowing when something is going on. So when I returned into the environment, I started to have these spiritual experiences, and they started coming in succession. First, they were somewhat religious based, and then I began to go into Gnosticism, as it was termed then, which is, of course, the ability to know without being told. And as I kept listening to that voice within reveal to me a lot of the secrets about the inner workings of reality, it still kept getting more and more aggressive. It seemed like every year around Christmas time or somewhere in there, I would go through these massive experiences. And at one point, I had the experience of all experiences up until that point, where from what I know now, I opened up my chakra centers by activating Kundalini. And I did it in a way that wasn't so much intentional, meaning that I was just experimenting with some meditation, and then all of a sudden, bam, I came into a full-on awakening. And through that 2 weeks, I got a chance to see the world as it really was. But because I didn't have knowledge about metaphysics, and I couldn't actually call upon anyone to give me information about what I was experiencing, it was very rough. And I began to see beyond the veil in the world. And I first came about that through learning about the language, English. In fact, there seemed to be a voice, which I call my oversoul, speaking in my mind. And it was saying, yeah, James, you like to play games. You're trying to get light, but you need to get light. You got too much weight, so you'll wait. And in that explanation, I was seeing not only my life as it was at that point, because I've always lived a very fortunate life despite my pitfalls. I've always been like the fly on the wall in those situations, like, hey, that guy is not supposed to be there. So what happened to me was I began to have these very massive spiritual experiences. And I was able to connect that also with my childhood and the things that I had read and I had learned. And then I also began to see with my own abilities what was exactly going on in the reality. And somewhere in that process, again, I began to decode the language. So I wrote a book about it. It's almost like the half-crazy Last Will of Testament book. And it was my way, personally, of saying, hey, I've found out something, and this something that I've discovered is eventually going to take me so far beyond this world. The main thing I don't want to do is leave with that information. I want to give that information to everyone. So I published a book, self-published for free, called The Code of the Matrix, still available on the internet right now. It's somewhat of a cult classic. And in this book, I began to decode everything about the language, belief systems, structures, manipulation, but in a 21st century way. I mean, so innovative in giving the person giving the reader along with myself the ability to begin to wipe the slate clean and begin to look at everything that we're experiencing and ask the question, have I been told the truth, or do I need to go and find the truth out myself? And if I'm going to go find the truth, how do I know that I'm learning the truth? And this was the beginning, because what the language allowed it allowed me to have, and others that read the book, somewhat of a blueprint to begin to decipher language and begin to decipher what's going on in the reality, their names, the street that they live on, even the cars that they drive. So many different components that actually say and speak to you all the time, but they speak to you in a code that we have yet to really fully begin to decrypt. And that code, of course, is our language. Because when we think about it, everything we do nowadays especially is in this language. When we communicate with others, when we think to ourselves, everything that we even dream, we can dream and begin to speak English in the dream. So I began to learn through my experiences that English was actually a program. And it was a program that was placed in a highly magnificent being to begin to govern how we think, how we feel, and how we interpret the reality. So that's what the Code of the Matrix was all about. Again, I wrote the book as a last will and testament. It was something that I was saying that I felt like, hey, I got to get this off like a crystal skull to everyone else, and then I'm going to be gone. But needless to say, when I wrote the book, within 3 days, it had 500,000 views, so it went viral. And people were contacting me from all over the world, not only confirming the experience that I was having was something that they had also had in some way, shape, or form, but also that this was giving them even more insight to the experience that they were having. So we started a website, and that website was known as The Resistance. And it became so strong, this resistance, which I look at more of like the immune system, that we began to rank #1 on Google for the topic, the resistance. And we used to anagram it, and it was a heretic's nest, meaning that the knowledge and the information that was shared within the resistance was not about dogmas. It was not about gods. It placed the person as the central character in the theme, meaning it placed the person before the leader, what one should worship, what one should say, all of those different things, the language, the realities, the president, you name it. It moved all of that out of the way and put the person there as a supreme being. And it's so amazing because when a person begins to figure out how much power and how much ability they really have by fact, see, because this is the other thing. Throughout my childhood, I also wanted to know what happens when you die. But because I was coming through the computer age, I mean, we saw Prodigy, we saw America Online, I saw all of that coming up, and I had this natural inclination for spirituality, but also for this technology and for all this logical stuff. So I built up a very strong logical side of my consciousness. But the big breaker for me is after I began to experience so many things, not only could I logically prove what I was experiencing truly existed by the most bona fide fields of research, such as science, etc., but it also became very difficult for me to prove that what I wasn't experiencing wasn't real. And that kind of shook things up for me, because if I attempted to accept that it wasn't real and neglect what was actually happening, it would drive me further into insanity, because I could prove it from a logical mind what was going on. And so I brought those two into balance, and I used those powers and abilities of the logic and the spiritual to build a place that we can begin to share this information. And that first place, as I mentioned, was The Resistance. That site is actually archived now, but it's still up to date as resistance2010.com. And what you find there is actually 1,200 and some odd blogs of me just going at it. Some of those blogs, along as short books themselves, of continuously ciphering this message. And the most unique thing that was going on is not only the immense amount of synchronicity that we were all experiencing. I wasn't there as some kind of guru. I was there as a person that was experiencing something that was just documenting that experience through the popular throughputs of the reality, i.e. social media, the internet, video, etc. And that, I know for sure from the messages that I received and the energy that I felt, changed things magnificently. And this becomes an ode to those who feel like at times that it's not them that's supposed to cause this major change. I would ask you to ask yourself the question, but who else? Who has been through such circumstances, and who is calibrated and has the alchemical formula to reach the populace, to reach the youth, and to reach the state of mind that we're in now? And so we began to culminate this knowledge and information. We also created a place to where when people were waking up, they could come there and they could find someone that was at the same stage that they were at, or maybe even a couple steps ahead, so they can give them some pointers about what to avoid and how to take in the information. And so this was the beginning. And our appeal for a while was to the spiritual connoisseur, because we really dealt with a lot of very occult, deep, secret knowledge. But my heart has always been to thinking about, what about the youth? Like, what about all of those guys that are still locked down in those prisons, and many of them have no real hope, no way of getting the information, and no way of getting knowledge. And so I started launching an effort to get that information, and I'm going to speed up a little bit here. I started launching an effort to get that information to people so that they could get it to other people that were inside. And we're still actually working on that now, of bringing forth something that when we send knowledge and information into these prison systems, knowledge of the highest caliber about this kind of spiritual knowledge that we've come across over the last 6 to 7 years, then these guys have all the time in the world. And of course, we want to send it to women prisons too, have all the time in the world to actually read this and really ingest it and get into the meditation. And the reason why I feel like this is so important is because it causes the insurrection. Like, if you understand metaphysics and you understand the dynamics of what we're dealing with in this matrix, then you'll realize that the lowest of us, when brought up, bring up all of us. So we rise by actually ascending others. So those who are doing the deepest work actually go to the darkest, deepest places, to where things have been forgotten about, in order to shine their light where there is no light, there's only ignorance, and to bring that knowledge and that wisdom to those spaces in order to bring those beings back into the full realization of their total self. And once that happens, it would then create a vibration so strong in the foundation of our planetary, cosmic, and biological metaphysical system that we will begin to truly experience what we all have as our vision of the connection of all of us together in our experience. So that's AstroQuest. AstroQuest in itself is interactive enlightenment. It's aimed at a younger crowd in order to get them into realizing that they are not only powerful, but this is also entertaining. Like, when you look at the selfie generation and you see so many people caught up in themselves, instead of neglecting that and saying, hey, you need to let go of the ego, all you need to tell them is, hey, all is self. The better that you make yourself, then you will be able to not only assist yourself, and the reflection of who you become will emit in everything that you create. You'll become a vibrational hub or frequency or transmitter for those who are around you and those who are looking for that change. And that's what AstroQuest is. And even to date, there's approximately 200, 300 videos of AstroQuest, interactive enlightenment, where we're going through all this knowledge hand in hand. Now, the thing is about I have about an hour and a half to speak, and I definitely want to take any questions that you may have, and I got quite a bit to get through, is that we've uncovered so much, there's actually no question that we can't answer about this physical dimension and a few dimensions adjacent to this one. And while that may be a big claim, one needs to also realize, when looking at the work that we've accomplished for the last 6 years, is that we're so serious about this. What we don't want is the placebo. What we don't want is something that doesn't work. And we know how serious our spirits are in effect to getting beyond this sphere where there's even dominion close to us, right? And what we've uncovered is not just namaste, love and light. It's also getting balance with the reality of what's going on in the world, and how, in fact, to make change from all aspects. That's mentally, physically, spiritually, but first making that change within yourself. Hence, we coined the term inner standing, meaning stand for something within yourself. And through that, you can be a pillar and a foundation for others. So as we were going through this process, and knowledge was continuously building, and things were going amazing, and I've done, I guess, at least hundreds of shows now on different stations, I still saw that I was underground and grassroots. Like, there were still numbers that were, very low. It meant that not everyone was getting the message. So I started thinking, because I've always monitored everything going on in the world. I don't leave myself excluded to anything. I can handle it all because of my past experiences. And I began to say, well, it's just like when I was younger. I asked the question, what happens when you die? When I saw something, like I think it was a pet, the pet died. And I asked my mom, so what happens now? And she said, well, only God knows. So I was like, well, I got to get in touch with this person named God. And needless to say, it was very difficult to reach God. Every time you call, seems to get no answer. So it bothered me. And even throughout life, when I hit the heights, because I've always had intelligence, so I've always been able to use that intelligence to propel me through the reality, even in the greatest times, I would sometimes feel a dark cloud coming over my great time, and it would say, but you still don't know what happens when you die. And that would just kill it for me. So because of the fact that if we leave here and we don't remember anything, just like we came here and we didn't remember that we were here before. Some are beginning to recall their genetic timeline and their dinonucleic timeline. But for most people, they don't have a sound idea of what happened before they got here. And because of that, I felt like why was I even living life? Why was I loving my mother? Why was I loving my girlfriend or anything for that matter if I was just going to forget about it? So I felt like finding the answer to what happens after death was tied into the answer of how to keep memories. And I really will say now that we've cracked that. We've actually cracked that a couple years ago. That knowledge is available. So for those who have that same quest in life, you can not only fulfill the answer of what to know the answer to that question, you can also go beyond, because there is even something beyond that, because that is like a wall that's put in front of us that causes fears. And once we break down that wall, what we would call between the living and the dead, or between our knowing and unknowing, then we begin to truly live life, because all the fears begin to melt away. But yet and still, let's rewind a little bit here. I started thinking about the reality, because I grew up in Oceanside, California. My father was in the military, so I stayed on the base for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then there was a divorce, so I was off on my own for a while with my mother. But through that period, I saw them bring the stealth bomber up. And I saw down the bottom of the screen, and this as a little kid, it said the price that they paid to build this plane. And I was flabbergasted. And it was because I couldn't imagine why we would spend that much money on something and not spend it on what happens after we die. So for me as a child, nothing made sense, because I felt like the world was not addressing the major question. Obviously, later on, I began to realize why. But in seeing how much of our resources were poured into things that had nothing to do with our spirituality, I always had in the back of my mind, why don't we use the innovation that we find out today, the things that really change the world, and why don't we apply them to our spiritual life? And I can fast forward here and just explain that happened with open source. And for those that don't know about open source, I'm going to give a brief explanation of it. And what open source is open source is a way to actually open up the functionality of whatever you're developing to others, and to not limit them by patents and copyrights. And as you see here on this diagram, these are some of the top open source applications that we use today. Obviously, Creative Commons is open source. Mozilla Firefox is open source. Joomla, Ubuntu, these different services, Linux, are all open source. And the success of those platforms have been what many industry giants such as Target and Johnson & Johnson and all those, I need a patent for this, HP, I need a patent for that, have been trying to recover from at this point, because they have not been working in the open source way. Open source has changed things and is changing things rapidly when it comes to industry. So when I saw open source and what it did for the industry, I said, man, but what can open source do for spirituality? And that brought us to the next phase. It brought us to secret energy. Open source spirituality. Now, mind you, the Resistance platform and AstroQuest as a platform, both being websites, grew to actually 16,000 members. And of course, there was probably more members that didn't sign on because everyone was still paranoid about the knowledge. So at a certain point, we decided that we were going to migrate everyone from those platforms into one platform so that we can all begin to share knowledge and information of the highest caliber. And that's what became Secret Energy, and it's up now today. Open source spirituality platform, all the spiritual advisors that you can think of, thousands and thousands of books that we do what we need to do to get those books to you, frequencies, tones, vibrations, chat room, algorithm-based system where you ask a question, then you get answers. Same system Yahoo uses. Good answers go to the top, trolling and bad answers go to the bottom, so no need in going down there. So you can get answers to the questions like, should I vaccinate my child, without going to Google and getting such a conflicting response that you don't know what to do. So really drilling into it, and then allowing others that had already gained either an excessive level of their own spiritual enlightenment or just eclectic at what they do, to begin to comment and begin to share a common place. And that's what secret energy is. That's what open source spirituality has done. And it's doing major things even now. We've even created an university. So going on from there. So that just gives you a brief background of who I am and what I'm about and what's going on all the way up until this date. And so what I'm going to do now is I just want to show you, before we take questions, a couple things that we discovered that I felt were paramount to what you really need to know about this realm that you're living in. So let me start here by first saying that we have to realize that the time that we're going through right now, which we're actually calling some form of enlightenment, actually occurred already in succession, but in a major time, which was only about 120 years ago. And during this period, which is called the Enlightenment Era, you can go to Google and check it out, the wisest people of the world, per se, by commission of the king and aristocracy, began to collect the highest levels of knowledge available in the world in order to bring that knowledge to be examined so that there could become an idea of what exactly is going on the spiritual plane. So the same question that we have today right now about metaphysics and about activation, chakra centers, all that was already put into question, and amazing answers came back because there was no TV. Many people were basing their entire career on what they introduced. If you introduced something massive and powerful, then you generally were rewarded. Some were even knighted. So when you look at the Royal Society, which is, what JSTOR, all the books that are being held in JSTOR, most of them are written by the Royal Society, but locked out from most people. As you see, the internet's own boy released all of those documentations through the internet, 31 gigs of knowledge that people have yet to really go through to see the value of what's in there. But the Royal Societies began to collect all the knowledge about spirituality and how the world works, how language works, and most importantly, where we really come from. And it turns out that in that knowledge and information, what was discovered is our multiple existence across several realms. But more importantly, our origins being that from the ocean. And what I'm showing you now is some radiolaria pulled from the ocean by George Haeckel. And what you see in this is actually the helmets of some of the Mongolians. So we find that much of the inspiration of the symbolism that we're using in the reality today, the geometry that some have usurped and said belong to dogmatic systems and belief structures, all of this coming from the ocean. And this is why there's a term by the Jesuits called the Holy See. This is why maritime law trumps all of the laws, because our true origins is from the sea. And on top of that, for the indigenous people, the sea was in fact space. That the sea or the ocean is a reflection of what goes on in space, as above, so below. So anything that you can find out there, you can actually find in the ocean. So I didn't mention earlier, but I'm going to be doing 2 powerful sessions during LIB. One is about the origins of Earth, and the other one is about the power of symbolism. So I welcome anyone to attend. Obviously, my times are on the card to get those presentations so I can go a little bit deeper about what I'm explaining to you. But just keep in mind that our origins are from the sea if this is the last time that you are able to attend this kind of event and you're off doing something else. Another one of the main things that we discovered was the words. As I told you before, I was really deep into the words, and it began to unfold the English language. I figured out the English language had more to it than we actually thought. But more than anything, that language was actually a symbol. And if you see here, I believe that would be on the right of your screen, you're looking at the Hebrew language when all connected together, equaling the Magan star, or modernly called the Star of David. But of course, it comes from ancient antiquity. So I started to ask myself, were there other languages that had this same symbolism and had this same effect? And sure enough, it was. I studied Sanskrit, I studied Arabic, I studied many other languages to find not only their master symbol, but also their codes and how they control the mind. But I started with English. And the first thing about English that you should know is this. It's the first part of breaking the code, that the English words are actually backwards. or as we would say, backwards. That we have now begun to compartmentalize ourselves with the language by saying the same word but giving it different meanings, when in fact every word that sounds the same does have some very unique connection if you know how to crack the code. But the interesting thing about language is if you actually are reading language from left to right, then what it actually does is it turns your mind in that direction. And I found this interesting because in the ancient languages, those languages didn't move in that direction. Some move up and down, some move left and right. And even hieroglyphs, which are over 2,000 characters, when you read it from down to up, you get the ascended explanation of what's being written. When you read it left to right, you get the logical explanation of what's being written. Opposite, you get the spiritual of what's being written. So this allows you to begin to fully understand the depth of what's being written. That way you're not led astray by words that sound alike or one direction of the words. So just remember, language functions as a program in our mind. And what happens is because we're on a language that goes from left to right, which is called clockwise, that's also actually the direction of our decay. So this is why it's also so important to go beyond the language, go into the tones and the frequencies and the cymatics and begin to truly realize what your name is. My name is not James or Sevan or some of these dull vibrations. Your name is not Jane or Judy or any of those dull vibrations. It's actually a symphony that your chakras play, that it never repeats itself because everything is acting on you, the environment, others around you, and never can that time and that space be duplicated again. So you are truly unique and your name is unique but often hidden. So that's why name is an anagram for the word Amen, and the word Amen, of course, means hidden. So another one of the things that we discovered, just so you understand about the English language, and again, we're just going over a couple things here. I know I'm being mindful of the time that we have, is that I discovered that English, when you look deep into systems such as Freemasonry and accepted Freemasonry, which are two different things, you actually find that the language was put together by a specific group of people in order to begin to control the mindset of the people who are later on to adopt that language. One of the major key players in the language that we're using today was actually the Grimm brothers, who wrote the Mother Goose and Grimm and the Nursery rhymes that basically are like nightmares that play over and over again in the child's mind. But there was a deeper level to language. Language is very occult. As we know, language is spelling or a spell. Even in your computer, the cursor is there. It blinks, waiting to take a command. So there's a lot about our language that actually shows us that it's very magical, and the ability to speak, especially to speak something into existence by using the proper tones, is one of the powers that we have that give us such high levels of sentience. But of course, if we're put onto a system that does not reflect that level of power, then we become limited by the program that we've adapted. So one of the major things that you should understand about English is that even though you know 26 letters, there's another 26 letters that are actually hidden. And you witness this in the Desmodema script, or the sheer knowledge that there is a parallel to this reality, which some have actually seen before. Obviously, when you blow open a few chakras, you see quite a few things. But one of the main things you see is the mirrored reality. So some say, through the looking glass, which of course is the mirror. And what they're referring to is that there's a pairing that needs to go on at times with your vision and also how you interpret things in order for you to see the complete picture. And because that's a universal blueprint or a cosmic law in the realm that we're in, it means that you can begin to divine the secret to many things by simply pairing them, even pictures, photos, etc. So what we find is 26 languages in the in the English language, and then we find another 26 that are hidden, giving us 52. This gives us why we have 52 weeks in a year, which is known as one Anu. An Anu is similar to all of the cards, and this again would be the English card deck. That's why we have 52 cards or 52 tarot cards. Now the word tarot comes from the word rota or rotate or a wheel. And this is of course why zodiac, astrology, astronomy, and all of those systems begin to link into a wheel. Sometimes they call that the wheel of life. So with languages, the first letter is supposed to connect with the last letter. So A is supposed to connect to Z. And what this creates is known as the cabal or cable. our word for that is cable. A cable meaning a rope where the beginning connects to the end. And when the beginning connects to the end, then you have a complete wheel rolling in your mind of everything that can happen and everything that will happen. And unfortunately, what we uncovered is because most people only have half of the language, then they don't know the destiny. They don't know their judgment. They don't know what's beyond, so that they can begin to connect things and then go into the great continuum of themselves. So that's, of course, knowledge that we released. We began to break it down step by step, word for word, system by system. And because we learn, after a while, non-judgment, which is like a block in the wheel of your mind. We learn harmony, which allows you to understand and use compassion to see and understand the why something happened, rather than judging it right away in order for you to stop your mind and never get the complete picture. So these are things and techniques that we taught over time that people began to develop. And now what we've come up with is, like I said, pretty much the answers to everything that goes on in the reality. What I will let everyone know is that we're going to discuss something very major in the Flat Earth session, and that's exactly how we got here. So if anyone wants to know the origins and the beginning of this particular planetary system and our existence in it, I would recommend that you tune into that. And this is one of the diagrams from that course, but again, I'm not going to get into that now. What I am going to do, since it looks like that we're running into time a little bit, and I want to give plenty of time for any questions, is I'm going to take this opportunity now to go ahead and answer some questions and to go ahead and get into the next level of this, because just remember, anything that you want to know, this would be the time to actually ask it. And if you've had something that, you've always questioned when it relates to anything, symbolism, what happened to someone that you may have cared about, a specific system, a specific entity, anything, this is the time to get the answer, because that's what this is really about. It's 2016. We're probably a little bit late even, but now it's time for the annuals of life to be flung open completely. And also, we need to realize that if this knowledge is coming to us in this time, it's also coming to us in a time in which people actually don't really read anymore. So you have projects like Project Gutenberg that actually have thousands of books available, many of them that have spiritual knowledge in them, but because most don't read, nobody knows those books are there. But what we do, because it's even operating as 15,000 people, we're 30,000 eyes. And when you have 30,000 eyes looking and saying, hey, maybe this is something that we need to look closer at, and then sending that into the platform in order for us to file it properly and to distribute it properly into the social networks and what people get into today, you come up with quite a bit of knowledge, but also experience and the wisdom that's necessary for us to make it. So what I want to say in conclusion before we take questions is, what should you do with all of this? Like, a lot of us are caught into now getting all this information, but we now need to go into application. So it's important for you to sit down at night, get into yourself, be present at that moment and say, what am I really looking to do forever? Because we're immortals. We don't perish. The only thing that can happen is we can be made to forget. Energy never dies. It only transmutes. And you're now at the brink of an era that's going to produce what we call professional reincarnation. This is knowing where you're going when you leave here. It's producing a great deal of knowledge and power that even breaks down the walls that has separated you from your loved ones, has separated you from your ancestors. Because remember, the most key thing that I found when studying just the dynamics of energy, currency, alchemy, etc., is memories. Because memories give us energy. I'll say that again. Memories give us energy. When you get old and you're back there and you start thinking about these great times, a smile will come over your face and energy will go into your body and you will be enlivened once more. When we think, what would we be or what we'll be doing right now without memories, we wouldn't even be able to identify where we're at. So just remember, create special, powerful memories and instill yourself with truth. So that way, when the cosmic wind blows, you're still that foundation for others. So here we go. Wholeness to everyone, and thank you for allowing me to participate in this Flat Earth panel. It's quite an amazing time. I got a chance to get in last night and give some brief information, but today I'm definitely ready to present some information about the condition of Earth, where we are, what it's shaped like, the dimensions, etc., to hopefully give more clarity on the subject. And I first want to say, giving big thanks to the Lightning in a Bottle team for making this all possible. Dream Rockwell, the sound guys, and all the people who put this together, the generators, the producers, the capacitors, and all the different components that are necessary for something of this magnitude to be possible. So I want to give thanks for that and let you know that this is extremely special to me in order to be a part of such a major event. Just a brief bio, only a couple minutes, because I do have about a 20-minute runtime on my presentation. And I just wanted to say that, the reason why I can speak on these topics is because I've been studying spirituality ever since I was 5 years old, and having a multiple level of experiences, not only just in that realm of spirituality, but also in the world. And it has brought me to a point of being somewhat of a connoisseur of spiritual knowledge. And I do, of course, share that knowledge with others through the platform that I have, which is AstroQuest, The Resistance, and currently open source spirituality, and that is Secret Energy, for those who are wondering, exactly where we're at and where we're producing information. I also wrote a book called The Code to the Matrix, which gives a deeper insight on language and everything that's going on in the reality, especially based on religion, external deities, etc. And so just getting right into this, what I really want to talk about first is that I wanted to first say thank you to the seekers of truth and the givers of truth. We're all looking to penetrate this chasm of deep knowledge and get some kind of clarity as to what exactly is going on our planetary system, how we can make things better, and also how we can continue to develop our souls. And that is primary. So the more of us that are sharing the knowledge and information, bouncing it back and forth, and coming into more of a realization of what's going on, the better. So today's message, I do have some illustrations to show, and I'm just going to jump right into this in respect of time. And I really want to say first that the dimensions and the shape of Earth are what we determine it is. We have to be very clear about where we're exactly at and what's happening and what's happened over time, but there is an infinite vault, meaning an infinite amount of space above us, and there is also an infinite abyss or space below us. And what we're doing is we're actually filling that space. We fill that space with our energy, our concepts, even our constructs, and we often have to see that our expansion moves in all directions. So when someone says that they're ascending, in equal measure, they're also descending, and they're also moving left and right. So ascension in itself is something that grows out into this direction because you're expanding, and that's something that's well understood about our spiritual vehicle. So the image that I'm showing you here is actually they're two rather ancient images from two spectrums of the cultures that are presiding here on Earth. And the reason why I'm showing this image is so that you can see that it's all encompassing the idea of where our origins are when we enter into physicality. And one picture, which you'll see, is much more archaic. It's a Sumerian picture of what we would say is Tiamat, also known as Leviathan, also known as Behemoth, also known as the mother of monsters. And that's because the birth of the entities that came forth from her were known to be chimeric, or actually containing more than one type of being or characteristic. And these now come out to us as the zodiac signs. It comes out to us as even gods or deities that sometimes request to be worshipped. It comes out to us as archons, but their origins were with the mother, and our origins are with the mother. So that's an important thing to remember. You're also seeing a rather old statue of Gaelic tradition of the same kind of image of a mother that is clearly aquatic and from the ocean, and known as also the aquatic or mother goddess. And the reason why I find this so important to start from this standpoint is because if you don't know where you come from, then you don't know where you're going. That's how all plants and that's how all things grow. They must recall first where they came from, and then they know where they're going. The seed of anything always contains the whole. So there's absolutely no way we can begin to determine what the size, shape, and form of Earth may be without first having the knowledge of exactly where we came from. And as that knowledge continues, you'll see it pass across traditions. This is actually another elder tradition in Kemet. This is Mayat, and this is the actual emission of the planet, what's on the planet. So once again, you see what's being depicted is a womb and everything being encompassed inside of that womb. So the first thing that I would really like to bring forth for all of us to understand is that we are inside of something and on top of something that is very much alive. We talk about it all the time, Mother Earth. We see trees grow out of it. We sustain ourselves from it. But often it skips our consciousness that this is actually alive and it is a living being. And in many cases, when you study the ancient traditions, which I've not only studied, but also been able to journey through my projections of the astral eye and also through my chakra centers, you'll begin to witness an archaic connection with this mother goddess, which is actually what we're on. Now, I would like to first introduce something that is often skipped within the presentations about the goddess. And we'll run this picture back one more time. And that's, we refer to it as a goddess because primarily it's feminine, but it does have a masculine component. Even men have a feminine component. We have a positive, a negative, and a neutral side to our body. And in physicality, we only appear as what we're partial to the most. So if you're partial to one pole, you'll come out as male. You're partial to another pole, you'll come out as female. And if you ever come in completely balanced, you'll actually come into the reality as a hermaphrodite, which we actually don't see that much anymore because there's a 23.5 degree tilt on the earth that actually governs why most people use their right hand opposed to their left. So what you see here is you see also this birthing taking place, because some may ask, well, how did this mother birth these children? And when you study this from an archaic level, even the Parthenon, you see that women, as we would call them, could become pregnant without the actual external male component. That's also referred to as parthenogenesis. You can look it up. It's mainly present within the reptilian species. And this is also why you see that the mother has the termination of reptilian legs, or which could be considered as scales or fish legs. And for anybody that's thinking about it, yes, this is also what's now come to us as the Starbucks symbol. Now, this image here is actually showing you across time how the image of the mother goddess has actually morphed through time from indigenous cultures. And if you notice the chart to the top left, you'll see that the symbol in itself is that of an anchor. That our modern anchor, and the shape of that anchor, is actually modeled after the goddess. And the reason is the mother goddess, or the mothership. And the reason is because this mothership is actually anchoring us in this vault or this abyss. And this is important to remember because for all beings in the physicality, you actually need something firm to stand on. You need roots in order to be able to grow up. So the mother goddess has always provided those roots, and we're still on that ship now. And that ship is organic and it is alive. You'll also notice to when you start seeing the topographical instance of the earth that, in a nutshell, that all the bodies, as we're calling them, because in archaic form, they are literally bodies. And it baffles our consciousness to how a body could be that large. But when you start moving up through the frequencies and you move out of the density of the physical reality, and then you cancel time, you actually can see the earth moving and breathing as a life form. And even when you go into different places, you'll also see the varying characteristics of these life forms. But just to take it as it is, the life forms are in themselves emerging from the deep or emerging from the water, and we're standing on top of those life forms. So before we can even go further, though, we have to dig a little bit deeper into our origins. And our origins are, in fact, from the ocean. And this is why you often see in occult terminology, there's a reference to the Holy See. There's a reference to Mary, which means the ocean, which comes out in Christianity and many traditions as the goddess. And then you also witness things like these images, which are George Haeckel's radiolaria. And in these images, what you begin to see is you begin to see not only the origins of life from its minute scale, but also to its magnitude, because the geometry is fractal. So this means that much of what, if not all of what has been introduced into this world today is actually been pulled from the ocean. And that comes in the state of our subconscious. It comes in the state of our inventions. It comes in the state of our occultism. It comes in the state of our symbolism. So it actually is embodied within everything that is presented to us in the world today. So while one may say there's nothing new under the sun, which is more of a male reference, as sun means male, there's actually the deep that one would need to research in order to get deeper into the knowledge about where we are and what's going on the planetary system. So as you can see here, when you begin to really study the albums of George Haeckel's work, you actually find entire shells that contain what we would call a heart, what we would call a spleen, and what we would call a liver, and the parts of the human body. But we're talking about a span of over millions of years of the process of the existence of this planetary system. So I wanted to let everyone know now, this is not an illusionary world. If it's an illusionary world to you, you would have to question how fake you are. This world is very real, and it also requires us to do some digging deep and also to use our extra senses in order to divine exactly what's happening here and what's gone on throughout the timeline. But this is a simple example of what you're seeing here is actually the helmets, or what appear to be the helmets of the Mongolians, but these are pulled from the sea. And it's just one example. I have several of them that I won't be able to show today, but one example of how our subconscious mind will pull a shape or an image of something from a primordial time and then come out with that as if we've invented it, or we use it as if it's something that we need to have as a part of our embodiment and a part of our protection. Here's also two maps that have been redone but come from much more ancient maps of what the world looked like before the continents began to divide. But the main characteristic that I want you to notice here is that everything is coming out of the water and surrounded by the water. So in the flat earth theory of the ice wall is actually an endless expanse of water that we're actually emerging from. And also to quell the conflicts that go on about space, the ocean to the indigenous was known to be space. The space is actually a reflection of what's in the ocean and what's on top of the emerging bodies of water coming out of the ocean. The only thing that you're seeing in the sky as far as those lights is you're seeing the spirits of the individuals that are still in the ocean or on land. And that's why in most occult knowledge, they say that there's a star in the sky that actually belongs to you. That is true. And many of the larger celestial bodies, the ones that we can see and we can recall as planets, are actually still in our ocean. And you're seeing the reflection of their spirit, which you could call bioluminescence. In addition to that, to also quell somewhat of the debates about if it's flat or not, we have to understand that even the top flat earth theorists did not actually use the term flat as a meaning of it actually being flat. That was just more of a catchphrase that kind of caught on for someone that was kind of discriminating against the whole theory that the earth was actually alive and actually a womb and a plane that we were walking on. Because in every sense, it's actually not flat. You can see many mountainous regions and valleys and also structures that embed themselves so deep into the mantle of these bodies that it would be kind of logical that you could eventually circumference the entire thing, but it would not be an orb. And I think that that's what the biggest arguments are about, is that Earth is not a sphere, which it is not. It is more of a craterous bowl-like chasm. Now we're going to move a little bit forward here, again, in respect of time, in order to come to a total realization of exactly where we are. And as I said earlier, much of what our Earth turns into from a geometric level is based on the collective, meaning if the masses believe that Earth is X, then Earth becomes X. That's called a morphogenic field. It's actually when the consciousness of the species on the planet begin to determine the size and the shape of the planet. Now, when we go back into the ancient traditions, we'll find that, especially when you study some of the occultism and esoteric knowledge, that most of these societies that are putting forth the idea of a new world or a new world order are actually practicing a Babylonian tradition. or a Sumerian tradition versus a Kemetan tradition. So it becomes very important for us to look at, in a sense, the Babylonian and the Sumerian concepts of what the world is actually looking like, because that has been embedded into the consciousness of everyone. So that's actually the reality that most people are living in until they choose to rise off the plane that they're on. So a big part of this, though, that I wanted to mention is that the reason why flat Earth becomes so life-changing for many people is because it challenges the very construct in which you're walking on, the foundation. And once a person begins to be somewhat unsure about their foundation, then they gain the ability to begin to, how can I put it? They gain the ability to begin to restructure everything. And this is sometimes referred to as the destroyer. So now the foundation is destroyed. You don't believe even the earth that you're standing on is the shape that they depict it as. And this is perfect for starting to unseat many of the concepts such as external gods and vaccinations and all those things. So we could see that the flat earth theory has actually been rather instrumental to many people in their expansion. So there's no argument about that. The next step of this, however, is to go back into the ancient knowledge in order to realize what exactly is going on. Now, what you see to what I believe would be the left of your screen, which looks like a dome that's cut in half, and a pyramid, a ziggurat, rising from sea level all the way up 7 steps, okay? And then if you notice, there's an inverted pyramid below that, descending into the underworld, and that is actually referred to as the underworld. So according to Babylonian theology and spiritualism, which again, we're still living in now, that the world was divided into 7 planes. This is also why we have 7 days of the week, 7 primary planets or 6 primary planets, a moon, etc., because each of these planes actually represent a state of consciousness. These are the arcs or the archons that we're choosing to use to develop the most sentient life forms on the planet, or could be perceived as the sentient life forms on the planet. Because one of the major things that you read about in the Sumerian and Babylonian literature is that they're actually attempting to civilize and tame Earth. And in fact, it appears that there was a great conflict between the mother goddess and the Sumerian traditions, which are actually written in the Sumerian text, where Earth, as we know it, was actually disabled, and parts of that Earth were used as the bodies that we're standing on now. Now, again, you would need to go deep into your theism and occultism and your esoteric knowledge and your meditations in order to divine this type of information. But the next thing that you'll start to realize is that if it's true, you will have a blueprint, meaning you will have a correspondence to what is supposed to be true, because it will redundify everywhere in the status of as above, so below. So what you're looking at here also in the middle is the spectrum. This is what we would call the rainbow bridge. This is what we would call the races of people, or the different types of people in the world, including the animals. And as you see that there are concentric lines, just like the Isles of Atlantis, concentric lines that actually mark the barriers between one existence and another. The truth is that what creates the buffer between one realm and another is actually the marriages that take place between those two, in this case, colors. But you do have a clear demarcation between one dimension and another. And for anyone who's gone through a massive spiritual experience, you'll find that you kind of raise off of Earth, or the Earth plane. You lose this body per se, but you gain the use of another body that is also shrouded around you, that is made of a less denser form. And then you're able to go through other spaces. So that's actually what you're seeing all the way on the right, is a diagram that was put together about how those concentric circles determine the development of the spheres that are around your body, in which we call the aura. In addition to that, you can see that the Babylonian or Sumerian concept was still the same as the earth and the ocean being a reflection of the cosmos. You're seeing that in the picture off to the right, to where below there's actually the 7 isles of the Sumerians, which again gives us the 7 gods, 7 days of the week, etc. And then you're seeing the mirror, or the reflection, or the correspondence being mimicked in the heavens, which again gives us the term as above, so below, in the heavens, also on earth. But another thing that I want you to see here, because this is going to start to solidify more and more that this is in fact going on and this is in fact true is that if you notice that the base pillar of this ziggurat, which is also known as the black pillar, corresponds to Saturn in the Sumerian tradition. And the interesting thing that was discovered about Saturn, and we'll come back to this image later, but that the poles actually are of a hexagonal nature, and that's over there on the right. And that hexagon, of course, gives us the cube. So what you then can divine, if you're following along, is that this base pillar is also known as the cube. And this cube is in many tenses what the indigenous used to refer to when they would draw diagrams like this. This is, of course, the ancient Oriental depiction of Earth and the cosmos all as one, not as separate. And then another depiction of Oriental depiction of the Earth, again, as a square having four corners. And then again, we get here the Aztecs emulating the same four corners. And then even the most popular image of the flat earth theory, there being four corners. And this is somewhat of a metaphor that has been taken rather literal and needs to be blown up, because in a two-dimensional aspect, the earth would then be flat, but in a three-dimensional aspect, then it would be a cube. And that's what's referred to in societies as the square, and standing on the square. And also the four elements that are around the tips of the square are actually known as the four elements. And those elements were used in order to create the actual forces that you're seeing on the earth. So now images such as this, which is the Hindu mythological representation of the world, make more sense, because this tortoise, which actually, when you dig deep, they'll tell you is the female, is actually a correspondence to the parthenogenic mother goddess. The four elements, which would then be elephants, are then interpreted holding the bowl or the concave shaped earth. So now you can fully interpret that symbol. So the thing is that with ancient mythology, you actually need to have the experience and you need to have the scope of understanding in order to be able to interpret the symbols, or it seems quite fanciful that the earth could be on the back of a turtle. And it's just because our terminology that we use to explain things is very different than the ancients' terminology. Now, here's another image that I showed earlier that's also very important, because it gives you more of an idea of what actually exists in the realm slightly above us, even higher, and then how all those realms merge together. Because in the patterns of the orbits of the planetary systems, what you actually get is the tracing of the stars. And that's why the name of the mother goddess has also been known as a star. And the reason is because the orbits of these planetary systems actually begin to dictate the geometry that is placed within the chakras. So we go back here to this image again, and we begin to see that each step on this ziggurat in this particular Babylonian system does actually correspond to geometry. And how the Sumerians would put that is by numbers. Like Marduk was 50, there's 40, there's 30, there's 20. And these are to depict the levels of the chakra centers that are actually encrusted within inside of each realm. And now you'll see on Earth that we actually have, on the left, you see the phi, which is, the left is the pattern that Venus traces out in the sky. Those are concave pentagrams, which are very different than straight line pentagrams when you understand geometry. But those concave pentagrams are actually what you witness in plant life, in phi, and in much of the mathematical encoding of the planetary system. And then you have 5 and 6 come together. So 6 is the base pillar. So when 5 and 6 come together, they make 11, which creates actually a dual plane. So what you're actually witnessing here is the terminology phi, which is also fighting. It's also conflict, because phi replicates itself based on conflict. And then you have 6, which is also sex, which is known to be what is taboo on the planet because it's the reproductive cycle. So when 5 and 6 get together, then there is a birth of what would be 11. So this is how the planetary systems, and we're just using soft numbers here, nothing's in stone, but this is how the planetary systems develop the life forms that live upon it and breed crossbreed through marriages the unique life forms that we see around us now. So this, of course, is archaic. It takes place over millions of years. And obviously the knowledge of this, as I spoke about yesterday, has already been uncovered by the Royal Societies and the Enlightenment era that took place over 180 years ago, in which the knowledge that was sequestered from that system, which of course a part of it was George Haeckel's radiolaria, was locked away from the populace and used now to control them. So what you see is literally what you see. Things coming from the sea or concepts from the mother, and then taken into the undivine masculine reality, and then shaped and formed and fashioned in another way, and then they come out as if they're the gods and the inventors of this, and that it belongs to them, etc., when that's not true at all. Now we want to get into another topic about why the spheric aspect of the world is even being used now, and it has a lot to do with this image. And many have seen this before. You will witness a circle around the sun or a circle around the moon, depending upon how the light is set up and depending upon the stage of the celestial body. And so this is why there was an idea, a concept that there was actually a round sphere around Earth, because it is true to a certain extent, but that sphere does not have much density to it. You actually have one of these spheres or toruses also around your body. So it's, again, another metaphor that is taken out of context, but there's a big difference between a sphere and a circle. Now remember, that's 2D versus 3D. So the 2D circle actually represents, as a symbol, a cycle or repetition. It's generally called the course, as there's courses in time. It also represents infinite rebirth and death. So that's why the circle symbolism is often used, because it harkens to an enclosure or a place that we're confined within, and then that there is a boundary. As you see on each of these systems, there's actually a boundary between each space, and those boundaries are not to be crossed according to the governors of the system. Now, these boundaries are also what we would say are the walls between the living and the afterlife. Or in flat earth terminology, we would call it the ice wall. But this could easily be crossed when using another vehicle that can actually get you into those spatials. Now, what I want you again to pay attention to is the center ring, because there's a really concise concept that you can adapt in order to really understand what you're dealing with. And this is, in effect, a disk. And I see that I'm running out of time, so I'll go ahead and conclude here. The last thing is just to understand that if you accept someone else's concept of what your space is, then this is a diagram of the manifestation of artificial reality, also known as the Adam Kadmon, which is when you're fed ideas of what the reality is that you're on, and then those realities begin to embed and interact with inside of your consciousness, thus creating a new kind of temple that can be controlled by an external party. The origins are with the mother, and I urge those to study this more, to tune into what we have, secretenergy.com, if you would like for more information. And thank you for having me on once again. It's been an amazing time, and I'll be looking forward to my presentation tomorrow, which will be about symbolism. So so that's it. Wholeness and balanced vibrations. All right. Wholeness and Balanced Vibrations, LIB. It's an amazing time to be here. This is definitely the last but not least transmission. I wanted to send big thanks to everyone out there making this possible. And this is an amazing time. Like, I wanted to first start off by saying that, wow, what can I really say? It's been such an amazing event. And I've gotten tons of feedback from people. And even though I'm here in Costa Rica, it's just amazing to be able to translate this message all the way to where you're at in California. And so I wanted to send big thanks to Dream Rockwell, the team out there that's put all this together and also invited me to this event. It's been nothing less than amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I do know that I have a time limit, so I got my thing running today just so I abide by those times. And the first thing I want to tell you is this is about your power. So Also, there'll be a little Q&A session after this. I'll make sure I leave a little bit of time. So if while you're getting this presentation, if you have a question, something that's deep in your heart, your soul, your spirit, and you want to know what the answer is to that question, this will be a good time to ask that question if it's not answered within this presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to establish some principles, and obviously many here are well aware of their progress in spirituality and have studied enough of the knowledge to be able to understand what I'm going to be talking about. But there probably will be some people who don't understand anything about the spiritual knowledge or have a little bit of knowledge, and we're going to need to fill in some blanks. So I'm saying that because I want to let you know I'm not going to assume that you know about everything that we're going to discuss here today and just go off with it. I want to establish a foundation of something that we call the universal language. So let us go ahead and begin. The first thing that I want you to take a look at here is some cymatic images. And of course, many are aware of cymatics, but for those who are not, cymatics are the actual tones or shapes that you get when you play tones. And this is a part of the universal language. The universal language is sound, shape, and color. I'll say that again. Sound, shape, and color, because every sound has a shape and a color. Every shape has a sound and a color, and every color has a sound and a shape. And that's most important to realize, especially when studying esoteric knowledge, because you begin to start being able to make connections that otherwise wouldn't be so obvious. Now, how it's really come to us as far as this connection between sound, shape, and color and these images that you're seeing now is actually through a device that looks like this. And this is actually called a Cyma Scope. And a Cyma Scope is this object that there's obviously a speaker coil, as you can see, centered in the middle of the object. And then there's water. And then there's a camera to take the image of the frequencies that are being played through the device. And through this process, we've gotten much more familiar with the in-depth patterns and shapes behind cymatics. Also, you have your classic cymatic plates. This is called a Chladni device. Many have probably seen this before. This is where you put salt onto a plate and you begin to play a tone, and as that tone begins to resonate, then you begin to see a pattern, the pattern that corresponds with that tone. So once again, we're getting deeper into the universal language. We find that sound actually equals a shape, and here is the proof of that. The next level is, of course, to establish the color. And what you're actually seeing in this diagram is the standard intonation chart of fa, sol, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and also the corresponding frequencies in hertz, and then also the color spectrum, or the colors that those sounds make. So now we have an establishment between sound, shape, and color, but this is actually quite ancient knowledge all the way up until even modern times, that it's always been known that there's a correlation between sound, shape, and color. And here's the musical scale, or the diatonic scale, and exactly how the tones on that scale make colors and what those colors are. So that's the first of this part of knowledge that I want you to understand, is the introductory of the universal language, because the universal language is the language that everything speaks. And it is our original language. And when we begin to use that language, we can communicate with all life forms. The next thing here, because we're going to get into, obviously, the head of the title of this particular presentation is Advanced Spiritual Curriculum and Quantum Field Activation. And I thought that the best way to actually get something like that going within the individual is actually to begin to introduce them to cosmic geometry and biological geometry and symbolism, and also linguistics, and how that affects you in everyday life, and how you use this system in order to create power within, and also to begin to emit power and create things that are without. So the next level of this, we have to actually go into the cosmos, because I will need to introduce everyone first to what the cosmos is doing. And this is very interesting, because a lot of times we wonder, why isn't the cosmos intervening in some of the situations that we're involved in? And, maybe there's an imbalance in the cosmos, but unfortunately for many people, they find out that that's not true, that the cosmos actually is in perfect balance, and it balances itself through positive, negative, and neutral. And it does have an overarching goal, agenda, or purpose, and that is the meaning to all things, which is energy. and the production and regeneration of perpetual energy. So I will have to explain this. There's no diagrams to actually show it unless we create it. And what it's really about is exactly how you get into the world, but more specifically, your purpose here and your connection with everything. And so how this works is what we would say is the oversoul. This is like the grown-up or adult version of you beyond the body. Some see the sun as a variation of an oversoul, sends emissions, and these emissions are in the form of light because they're in the highest densities. And that light then pierces into the envelope, also known as the womb, also known as the matrice, also known as water. And when it embeds itself through that piercing into those physical planes or wombs, then it begins the generation process. Now, the interesting part is that when we're emitted from the oversoul, we are in exact identical of our oversoul. And how this would look is it would look like we're in seed germ or seed form. And obviously there are many seeds on the planet, and they do bear a lot of interesting geometry once you get into the geometry. But the seed form is in fact containing the compressed sound and energy of the oversoul. And the purpose of the seed and its geometry is to actually create a resonance between the seed and the oversoul. So if we put this in traditional sense, then we have a connection, sometimes called an umbilical cord, sometimes called a silver line, some call it the anchor in the chasm, but we have a connection with our oversoul that allows us to send and receive energy, the same way that we're receiving energy from the celestial bodies, receiving energy from the sun, etc. And this becomes something that you have to look deep into, because it also means that within each seed there is the whole, and the only process that's actually taking place is that we're growing up. And that's why humans grow upwards. We're growing up in order to actually become an identical to our oversoul or our graduated state. And we begin here first as the seed germs, and as long as the seed is cultivated properly, and that's why there's a huge need for gardeners or people who understand husbandry or understand how to actually cultivate seeds in a reality and allow them to become to their maximum strength. Because what happens is that this creates a bridge of perpetual energy that connects us and our ancestors and all there is in the cosmos. And so this is very important, because it actually gets us into exactly why we would need to maintain a connection with our higher self and actually eventually become our higher self. So today we're talking about the oversoul, but this knowledge that you're going to receive is going to actually let you learn how to separate, to decrease the separation between you and your oversoul, and also actually become that. So also remember that every time there's a penetration, there's also an imprint or an image. That's also often referred to as a mark that does resonate the actual identity of the oversoul. And that's actually what symbolism is. Symbolism is the seed form or two-dimensional form of something that has the magnitude and power that, well, how can I put this? The magnitude and power is still in baby form and it's growing up, but still the seed possesses all of that magnitude and all of that power. So we're going to keep going here. And we're going to show here again this transition. And what this transition is about is actually in densities. So you start to see the connection, because the connection here is actually every single life form is filling a specific space in the continuum, meaning that the colors that we see on the spectrum, the density of life forms that we see on the spectrum, the variation of personalities that we see on the spectrum, the zodiacal signs that we see on the spectrum. All of this is spaced out to create a bridge between the oversouls and the seeds in order to create a continuum of perpetual energy. So this is the main purpose of the creation here on earth, is continue having that bridge, and also to allow us to remain connected to our energetic force. So now we begin to move into the deeper part of this, because obviously we have some very esoteric knowledge that we want to reveal today. And the first part of that is actually the world. or what I would refer to as the word and the world. Now we start to begin to see that these actual terms are very identical. In fact, the word is the same as the world except for adding an L. And in linguistics and etymology, you learn that the symbol of the L actually means in ancient languages the symbol of the god. So what's actually being said here is the supreme being can in fact create worlds through words. And as we go on, we'll start to see that words have, and tones and vibrations have everything to do with the creation of worlds. And we see that this whirl is actually the wave or the spiral and the frequency that emits as we speak tones and vibrations. So let's get a little bit deeper here just to give you some examples. We have here what many refer to as a mantra, okay? And what mantras are seeds and emanations of created worlds. I'm going to let that soak in for just a minute. The tones that you hear in a mantra, and that's why there's always a purpose within the mantra to actually pronounce it correctly, because what they actually are is they're seeds to worlds. And when, let's say, you have 1,000-petal lotus, then you have 1,000-syllable mantra that must be said perfectly in order for that world to be realized. So the whole purpose of mantra is to actually bring the energy of a specific world. Now, of course, there's tons of mantras just as there's tons of worlds, and each of the tones and the vibrations create unique variations in these worlds. So to prove that even more, you now come to a mandala, which is actually a visual representation of a mantra. And mandalas are often used, especially if you look into the Tibetan system, is they're used to create patterns that eventually become embedded within the consciousness. So that when the Lama is doing the astral travel, then they're able to astral travel to a specific place. Also in the vision or also in the meditation, they're able to travel into a specific place. So a mandala then is a two-dimensional imprint of worlds. And again, they're memorized to promote astral travel into that world. So this is what you would see if you took a mandala and took it into a three-dimensional format. So this is known as a kingdom, and it's brought about through the chanting and the tones and the vibrations that are going across time. Now, I'll explain that. See, every time we say something, even though it may get less and less as far as audibly, it's still traveling because it will even move through walls. And when sound is moving through walls, then it gets smaller. So it comes out of the visual, it comes out of the audible spectrum of what we can hear, but it's still playing a sound. And that sound actually sounds like a ringing in your ear. That's actually not tinnitus. Generally, it's the presence of an energetic form. So these tones and vibrations, and that's why there's chanting going on across a continuum in order to create a bridge, meaning that ancient cultures chanted to connect to their ancestors that were doing that same chanting across another level of the timeline. And so this becomes another very important fact, that we actually connect to our ancestors even subconsciously and through meditation. And we can connect to those ancestors from thousands and thousands of years ago. So what does that mean? What that means is that the ability that we have to use our tones and vibrations, and not only our mental or frontal lobe projections, allow us to break what we would call time, the speed of light, and those kind of things that hinder what we would call the world from the living to the world from what we perceive as the dead, but which is really the afterlife, which takes place on another time frame. So it gets even deeper, though, with language, that when we start to really study language, we find that language and symbolism do run hand in hand. They never should be separated from one another. Languages are symbols. Mathematical expressions are symbols. So even in studying the symbols in math, like the division symbol, you find that there's one dot, another dot, and a line in the middle, and that means division. So what's being said is one dot is, let's say, the spiritual body, and then another dot is the other spiritual body, and then the line in the middle is the realm in which that separates those two spiritual bodies, and that brings up division. So as we said before, these lines that you see, and you'll see it in concentric circles, you'll see it in spirals, those lines that you see in between those areas are actually what separate one realm from another. And when utilizing another body, which could be your voice, which could be your astral projection, it could be another vehicle like your ran, which is an Egyptian term for your astral body, you can pierce through those membranes because they are like veils in between one dimension and another. So sound, the sounds that we can emit and the thoughts that we have actually do that. But if you look at this chart, there's something even deeper to be revealed, and it's the connection between language and geology. Because what we'll find is that the first characters, and there's a book called The Passing of or there's a language called The Passing of Rivers, and then there's another book that's called The Four Rivers of Life. And what this book starts to show is that the rivers on the earth are actually lined out to the constellations in the cosmos, and that the first languages were actually developed on those patterns. And in addition to that, the zodiac, as we know it, was actually used in order to create the language. The symbols within the stars that we call the zodiac are also used to create the symbols within language, in this case, Hebrew. And then when you put all of those languages together, or all those words together, then they create a specific symbol. In this case, the Magan star, which is very ancient. So now we're starting to see the connection within all of this. And I'm going to take a moment to recap so that way it all starts to really connect for you. So because sound is shape, is color, it means that every time we say something, we're literally creating a world. But the perfection in what we're saying determines whether that world comes into existence, whether that seed grows up to become a manifestation, or it becomes null and void, meaning it falls into the chasm of nothingness. And let's look at a good explanation of that here. What you'll see is you'll see, these are one of the more older charts of antiquity, that the language, and this is of course a priest, is to be pronounced a certain kind of way in order to activate the actual tone itself. And that's done by the palatial. It's done all the way down into the chest. And because the whole purpose here is that, see, in English, just really the top of the mouth is used, and then maybe a little bit above what we would call the Adam's apple is used, but very little of the guttural tones that you see in the ancient languages. And there's a reason for this, because when you have the ancient language, you're actually speaking all the way from down deep, and then the word goes up through your passages, which would be your chakra centers, and then comes out of your mouth in full manifestation, because you've now taken that word and you've pronounced it properly. So what you're seeing here is the diagram showing that where the words are actually pronounced and how that connects with the windpipe and how that actually connects with other parts of the body. So that way, when a word is pronounced, in order for it to fully manifest, then it must go through the chakra centers of the being. So this lets you know right away that you have this power of being able to bring something from what we would say is the subjective plane into the physical plane. So generally that's called from inception to conception. Inception is the idea or the thought of it, right? And then so that idea and that thought starts, and that's the inception. And then the conception is if you can actually birth it into a physical world. Now remember, the process of birthing something in from the astral to the physical means that the seed or the word not only must be pronounced properly, but it must be put into the space or the environment in which it needs to grow. And that's actually the whole part of why the elements became so important, because if you were trying to accomplish something specific, then you would go into the environment that promoted that vibration and tone and nourished it properly in order for it to come to manifestation. Now, of course, today this is called magic, but there actually was no use for languages beyond this purpose, meaning that there was actually no use for speaking verbally except for to create things. So many of the life forms and many of the things that we see here in the world today were created from using the tones and vibrations that the ancestors spoke. And these tones and vibrations have been existing throughout antiquity and even before time. So let's move a little bit further here, because now we see another diagram, because I know some may ask, well, what about English? Because we talked about Hebrew and how when Hebrew is connected together that it makes a two-dimensional symbol called a Megan star. When you take English, which is actually a cognate of Futhark rune stones, and you put all of that together along with even the numbers and certain key symbolism that's used in the reality, you actually get this symbol. And this is known as the Monogram of English, because it contains every single pattern necessary to bring forth everything from the English language and the Futhark runes. In addition, when you study occultism, you find out that this is actually the diagram of the incarnated world that most are living in now, if they've taken on the English language in their mind and they don't have another variation, such as their own imagination or their own ancestral tongue, etc., in order to allow them to realize that the world is much more than just this symbol. So these symbols actually become more or less embedded within our consciousness and then begin to unpack themselves. So symbols, once again, are encrypted expressions of vast states of thought. And why is that? It's because the origins of a symbol come from the oversoul, and then it embeds itself, and then it's left to be unpacked. And that's what we're seeing within the diagrams that were shown. Obviously, again, this is a two-dimensional symbol of something that is yet to be unpacked. And then when it's unpacked, it comes out like this. And so what governs whether or not it can be unpacked is if it's put into the consciousness. This could be collective consciousness. This could be personal consciousness. If it's put into a collective or conscious environment in order for it to completely unfold itself. So that means that if a person doesn't believe this is true, they don't believe that their words have any power, they don't believe that there's any connection to the English language and spelling or spells and magic and all that kind of stuff, then it means that it never actually generally comes to fruition what they're attempting to manifest. But we also have learned with things like The Secret and those kind of systems that what you think about and what you focus on does indeed begin to manifest. But that's a light version and explanation of what's really going on. The next thing that we have to take a look at here is actually planetary geometry. And obviously I did a flat earth panel, so I'm not talking about just balls spinning around in the air. In fact, I revealed a little bit during that session that all celestial bodies, and I'll repeat that again, all celestial bodies are planets or stars, which are the spirits of the celestial bodies, but moving in the deep, meaning that they're actually moving in the water of the ocean that surrounds Earth, which is pretty much infinite. And their orbits create these patterns, and these patterns are because their shapes, their tones, their vibrations, and their modes of thought. And this is how we've come to actually understand even the gods. And that's why the gods generally represent themselves under these symbolism. Now, there's been a big corruption between what gods are, because the word God actually means the Germanic god Gud. So in every tense, I'm going to use a term that makes it a little bit easier, which is supreme being. You are a supreme being. You are a cosmos within. And the images that I'm showing you are just small variations and portions of what you truly are. So if you look back into the Enlightenment era, you'll find that this knowledge was already known. In this diagram, you actually see somewhat of an explosion of the cosmic bodies that are embedded within the being. Here's a chart that makes it easier to understand. I'm going to hold on that for a while and then come back to it. But it just means that all of these celestial bodies, or what we call a cosmos, is inside of you. So this is why you can actually create with words of power, because indeed you are a supreme being and you have those tones and vibrations moving through you, and you have the environment in order to create things using those tones and vibrations. So the act of creation itself is something that can be done by any being that is aware of their power. And in fact, many people have children, so they're already witnessing their form of creation, of putting in their seed and allowing that seed to go into the womb, and then the womb beginning to manifest a baby version or a smaller version of the adult so that it grows up to emulate the adult. Now, our duty as parents then would be to keep growing to the stage of the oversoul, so that way our children see our growth and then also follow the route that we go and begin to grow up into their total and full potential, which is actually limitless. Now, some more proof that this embedding of our chakra centers or the celestial bodies within us. So let's talk about a couple things that are synonymous with one another. It would be our organs in our body, chakras, geometry, mandalas, mantras. So all of that is actually the full comprising of the human being. So we have a lot of power within us, and that power is yet to be manifested within many. But with this kind of knowledge, you begin to realize, hey, this all connects. It's more difficult for me to believe that this is not happening, and then I better start to think about my own personal power versus bowing down or worshiping something or believing in something external, or just not doing anything with the magnificent gift that you've been given. Now here we have another ancient chart. And this chart once again shows those expressions of geometry embedded within the body. That's what's here. If you can still see it distinguished. Again, it's rather old, so it came in a parchment that was slightly damaged. But if you notice that there's a reference to the zodiac signs, as you've seen in many charts about your chakra centers, etc. And there's a reference to the geometry of the orbits of the celestial bodies. And again, that's because the seed germs that have been used in order to create the composite being that we're calling human all have in themselves specific geometry. And when we start looking at that a little bit more, we start to realize why the tones, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or the actual mantras that are used for the chakras were so important, because they actually do create these patterns. And that's why you can heal your chakras through tones and vibrations, because it actually allows them to resonate. Because remember what we talked about, it's all resonance. That the reason why you have a connection with the oversoul is because there is an imprint of the oversoul inside of you, and through resonance you have that connection, and that connection is very similar to magnetics. And I'll explain something very simple here. If you hold two magnets together in the attracting poles, when they snap together, if you pull them apart, you can feel the force between the two. But as you pull them apart further and further, you feel less and less of that force. But it doesn't mean that force is gone. In fact, if you take one magnet and you go to the other side of the world and you still have that other magnet at your house, there is still a connection or a link between those two magnets. And in fact, there's a connection and link between all magnetic fields. And that's what our ancestors utilized to communicate, what we call synchronicity, to harness power across the grid, which we call the ley lines, and many different things that actually come out today as geomancy. So we're going to talk about that in just a moment, but I do want to clarify on this chart what you're seeing is you're seeing the vowels and how their tone and vibration. You see the connection with those tones and vibrations and mandalas. So you understand or understand that every time you say something, a partial world is coming out of your mouth. And then deeper, even deeper, you see the connection between these patterns and your DNA. And that's why the more centered that you get into yourself, the more you begin to perfect your own consciousness, the more power and ability you have to control your destiny. And that's why this becomes so important. And I'll pause for a minute here because I do have a minute and 30 and it looks like we're still, we're almost through with the presentation and ready to get to questions, but we do have some time. But I do want to explain something that I've seen because I've been teaching for now 7 years publicly and studying this spiritual knowledge since I was 5 years old. And what I found was the greatest hindrance to our process was actually us getting stuck in dogmatic and religious systems. Now, I will put a disclaimer there that many of these things are steps for us on the ladder. They're actually in charge of governing some of the energy until we start realizing exactly what is going on, meaning that when there's a lot of energy and that energy fills you at one time, it may be too much for your vessel to hold. So sometimes these systems can work as being able to regulate those energies before you're ready to turn yourself on to the total reality of you as a supreme being. And that could be, in my book, their only purpose, that one should continuously move up the ladder of total realization and realize that there is no God in the sky that one should be worshiping or bowing down to, that one should actually be looking in and within, which we call understanding, and then start to really connect with themselves because the universe is inside of you. Because just imagine, all of what I reveal within this last 33 minutes is paramount to time travel, hyper levels of sentience, cross communication beyond time, invention of things that are not yet under the sun or in this reality, connection with totality. So we're talking about the big stuff here. And this is, of course, why this knowledge has been so governed in our reality and also hidden because of the power that it possesses. It possesses the power to put you in the driver's seat as the Lord and master of your own life rather than some other entity or life form or whatever that they're bringing to you next in order for you to be controlled through another system. So I'll keep going here, but just realize once again that this connection is very powerful. And it's something that you have within you already. It's not something that you need to go and find somewhere. All you have to do is begin to connect with it. You have this imagery. As I said, you could check us out at Secret Energy. A lot of this stuff has been made available. You could do your own research on cymatics. You can dig a little bit deeper into what mantras and mandalas are. What I also do recommend, though, is before you go saying any mantra and mandala, that you understand and learn what tones and vibrations really do, because we do know some people who've gotten in trouble with pronouncing tones and vibrations and mantras and all that kind of stuff and not understanding the true intention behind what they're doing. So I have to go even deeper. I'm going to go into the genetic level of the human being with something that few know about, and it's called phosphenes. And phosphenes are actually, when we press into our eyes, which is a form of meditation, you press into your eyes for about 5 to 7 minutes, or excuse me, not that long, but about 2 to 3 minutes, even less time, 30 seconds. You begin to see these black and white patterns. And when phosphenes were examined, like the black and white patterns that are seen in the mind's eye, it was connected immediately with drawings that children make, the most powerful symbols in the world, also known as the ineffable names of God, the concave pentagram, 1111, everyone's familiar with that, I'm sure, the spiral. So all of these symbols are actually found on the genetic level of the human being. So this is also why a person can be triggered by these symbols so easily. So if we're living in a society that uses this kind of symbolism as we're seeing here in McDonald's signs or in corporation signs or in clothing, then that would trigger the person to more of an ancestral recount of their primordial existence. And so they would feel some kind of connection to that. So this is actually what we have to worry about. If there's anything to worry about, this is what we would need to be wise about. I guess that's probably a better word, is when symbolism is used to actually control consciousness. So you're seeing here organic Venus, organic Saturn at their poles. And then now what you're seeing here in this image is inorganic Venus inverted and inorganic Saturn inverted. And this is called drawing down the power of the stars. This is actually geomancy. This is when the energy or the correspondence of a zodiacal sign is utilized and embedded within the geology or the actual geometric construct in the streets or on the ground. And then that energy is brought forth and harnessed. And in this tense, what you'll find is that there is no good and bad planets. What you actually have is there's a positive, a negative, and a neutral. Because remember, even within yourself, you're not only a planet, you're also a universe. So this means, as you know, you have your good side, and then you have your bad side. And then what you're working to do in most cases is to find your neutral or your harmonic balance, right? So in this case, in this geomancy, what's brought forth is, instead of Saturn's upright status, which is wisdom, fatherhood, focus, patience, willpower, Saturn's inverted aspects, which is ignorance, vengeance, malice, and death, is brought forward. And this, of course, is the geomancy that's in the streets of Washington, D.C. Once again, you have Venus, when upright, creates love, connectivity, sweetness, and passion, but when inverted, brings lust and disharmony and divorce, etc. So this is how geomancy is used in order to draw down the power of the stars in order to infuse the area and all the things that are going on in that area, the laws, the rules, the people who are walking in that territory, the decisions that are made in this White House, etc. And then I'm sure some caught that there's an inverted owl embedded within the street. And the only way you know what direction it's facing is by how they point the pentagram, and the geometry lets you see what is true north. And so all the symbolism here is inverted. So instead of the owl being upright, the owl is actually inverted, which is actually a sign of ignorance, because the sign turned upright is a sign of intelligence. So I also encourage people to, instead of judging a lot of this symbolism right away and saying, oh, that's evil, to realize that everything in the reality has a positive, a negative, and a neutral. And it's for us to divine the true meaning of things. But once again, there's another deeper level of this, and where this is our last level of depth. And then we're going to start taking some questions here. And that's how these signs and symbols, as I mentioned earlier, can be utilized in order to provoke a level of thought and a feeling inside of your consciousness that may instinctually feel right. And so this means that the level of manipulation that we're dealing with in the world today actually is utilizing the symbolism in order to trigger us into believing certain things, and then that symbolism is taken and basically formed and fashioned into the idealism of whatever they want you to think. So what you're looking at here on the top is actually radiolaria, and this is George Haeckel's work on discovery of pulling things from the ocean during the Enlightenment era. What you're then seeing on the left is what we would call now the Maltese cross, which you now see on the crest of Knights Templar and most secret societies. And that's used as a symbol of power, but its original origin is actually from the ocean. That's why it tends to connect back to the Merovingians or the Holy See, because they're direct plagiarizations from things taken from our mother or our womb. So what you're seeing, just in a nutshell, is symbolism is taken from the origins of life. And then that symbolism is in turn used to trigger our consciousness into believing in something that actually has a far more primordial existence than what generally is depicted. So we see even in the center a radiolaria that looks like the Virgin Mary, but is actually something that is pulled from the ocean that may indeed contain that kind of essence. In addition, you see another cross that is pulled from the ocean, and in the end, most geometry you'll find pentagrams, hexagons, etc., are found in the ocean. So they don't actually have a connection with many of these religious systems and dogmas. They have a connection more with what goes on in the ocean and how that comes about in our reality today. But I do want to say before we come to a conclusion that you need to know where your power comes from. And what that's going to allow you to do is it's going to allow you to not be fooled by all these systems that are out here that are claiming that, they have the power, and that, that you should worship them, and that the symbols belong to them, because that actually begins to distort our consciousness. And then when you begin to see all this and study what I'm showing you, you begin to see not only that this comes from organic nature, but also that it's within you. And so the only thing necessary is for you to begin to study self. And then when you study self, then you unlock all things.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next generation of science.
Is there any way in which one's mind can be transformed?